And this will probably go right up to 5. I promise I won't go beyond that. Okay. A lot of people seem to believe that although the market economy is a swell system, it requires the equivalent of a Soviet commissar to be in charge of money and interest rates. This belief is altogether misplaced. The Federal Reserve System, or simply the Fed, is both harmful and unnecessary. Since the Fed's creation in 1913, the dollar has lost at least 95% of its value. If the much maligned gold standard had produced such a result, we'd never hear the end of it. But in our system, the Fed is, for whatever reason, curiously exempt from criticism. Under the Fed, therefore, people have lost an option they once had, namely accumulating savings in cash. Under a commodity standard, people could save for the future simply by accumulating precious metal coins, which back when they functioned as money, held or even increased their value. No one has that option any longer. In other words, only a fool would try to save by piling up dollar bills. Instead, everyone is forced to become a speculator and to invest in securities markets they know little about and that can wipe them out entirely if times turn bad. As early as the 18th century, Richard Cantillon identified distribution effects as another way inflation harms the general public. The newly created money is injected at particular points. Whoever receives it first, in other words, people who happen to be politically well connected, get to spend it before prices have commensurately risen, and they thereby enjoy a windfall. By the time it trickles down to the general public, those people have been paying the higher prices to which the new money gives rise all that time. Private and public debt have exploded under this system, especially since the collapse of Bretton Woods in 1971. No one has a right to be surprised when indebtedness skyrockets under a system in which credit can be created out of thin air. The very existence of the Fed, a central bank, institutionalizes the problem of moral hazard. Moral hazard involves an actor's willingness to behave with an artificially elevated level of risk because he believes any losses he may incur will be borne by someone else. Since there is no physical limitation on paper money creation, market actors know the paper money producer can bail them out if things go terribly wrong. They have been vindicated in this belief time and again. They will therefore be more reckless in their investment activity and speculation than would otherwise be the case. We were once told that boom-bust business cycles were a thing of the past because thanks to the Fed, we now had scientific management of the money supply. If anyone believes that today, I'd like to meet him. Artificially low interest rates, courtesy of the Fed, do not in fact yield us a utopia of sunshine and kittens. To the contrary, they artificially stimulate capital goods production and long-term investment. They thereby deform the structure of production into a configuration that the public's freely expressed pattern of saving and consumption will not be able to sustain. When this phony boom inevitably collapses, it is capitalism that is stupidly blamed, when in fact the Fed, a non-market institution, is the culprit. I am interested in neither the saccharine promises nor the technical details of the alleged superiority of a monopoly fiat money system. The Fed is the lifeblood of the empire, the great enabler of the perversion of the original American Republic into the world's largest and most powerful government. Even if the Fed did confer a net economic benefit, a contention the great Austrian economists F.A. Hayek and Ludwig von Mises strenuously denied, in fact Hayek won the Nobel Prize in the process of denying it, even if the Fed did confer a net economic benefit, the alleged benefit could not possibly be worth the destruction of the American soul. As it turns out, we don't have to make that choice. When it comes to the Fed, justice, economic prosperity, and the values of the original American Republic are joined together. The Fed, its academic apologists, and the drones in our supposedly free press who demonize all dissent from the monetary status quo have done our economy enough damage. For the sake of American freedom and prosperity, it is long past time that, in the spirit of Andrew Jackson, we killed the monster. Thank you.
All right, John, you want to go next?
No, it's Warren.
You want to go next, Warren? Okay, Warren.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again. I want to note that my first trip to Zimbabwe was just a month ago after the collapse of their currency, and our strongest advice to them, they've dollarized and are literally using the US dollar, was to continue that regime and not to reintroduce their own currency anytime soon. So I would have to defend the Fed today, having endorsed Zimbabwe's embrace of the US dollar. Our topic is fed up with the Fed, should we abolish? This is not a topic about whether the Fed should adopt a different policy regime, such as a gold standard, but whether we should have a central bank at all. I can't resist noting Gene and I debated the topic of the gold standard last year, at which time the price of gold was $970 per ounce. This morning it was $912. I just thought you would like that market update. So the first half of the topic, fed up with the Fed, calls for a review of Fed policy. Has it been good? Has it been bad? What's the scorecard? And I don't want to go back through the entire history of the central banks. Central banks generally don't have a very good history and track record, and the Fed certainly has its black marks over its history as well. But let's look at where the world has come in the last several decades, because a lot has been learned, and monetary policy has been dramatically better around the world, including here in the United States. So let's start with Paul Volcker's Fed that killed the inflation of the late 1970s, when the inflation rate in the U.S. got up to 14% or so. Since that time, it's averaged about, since 2 years after that, as he brought the money supply back under control, inflation has averaged about 3% per annum for that several decade period. Real GDP has averaged about 3.2%, which is its average for the last several hundred years in the United States, up through the first quarter of this year. And over this decade through 2006, leaving out the recession that we are now in, it averaged 3% per annum. Over this period, we had about half the number of recessions. This last 30-year period, we've had about half the number of recessions that we did throughout our previous history. The Fed's record in these last several decades is not all roses, however, as you know. The Fed did keep interest rates too low for too long between 2002 through 2004, contributing to the housing price bubble. This is true. But low interest rates had other market forces contributing to the low interest rates as well. An overvalued U.S. dollar produced large and growing trade deficits that sucked dollars in from China and other countries, keeping interest rates low. With a gold standard, interest rates would have been even lower until the trade deficit was reduced, as all adjustments would had to have been made through domestic prices. Markets are the best way of reconciling conflicting forces and moving the economy forward, but because it's the best system doesn't mean it's without its challenges and difficulties and hardships. How has the Fed performed in the last 2 years? The Fed responded to the financial crisis emanating from the collapse of the real estate bubble in several ways. First, on the monetary policy front, it reduced interest rates in the face of a collapse of aggregate demand to soften the impact of the fall in housing and other asset prices, and prevented a collapse in the money supply after September 2008, September of this last year, by doubling base money. These traditional central bank functions